See a few other folks logging in here as well while we're waiting for our start time. And before I pass the mic over to Janine, we'd love to learn a little bit more about you. So I see a few folks are typing in where they're from. Please continue to go ahead and use that chat feature. Tell us where you're joining from, and perhaps what was it that made you sign up for today's event? What interested you? Go ahead and type that in to the chat. If you're just joining, the chat should appear at the bottom of your screen as a little chat bubble. When you click on that, it pops out, or it should, over on the right-hand side. And you can go ahead and type that message in, where you're joining from, and what was it that made you sign up for today's event. We'll get started in just another minute or so. David, thank you so much for your kind words. Janine is going to be thrilled with this. David from Nebraska here, because Janine is awesome. You're all about to see Janine in action, sharing some fabulous information with us. Deborah, yeah, glad to support Janine. Wonderful. Thanks for joining today. Thank you, Sophia, for sharing that. You'd love to learn how to cope with current normal. Yes, and we have that in quotes for sure. And to share information with your colleagues. Fantastic. Lucinda, thanks for your kind words for Janine as well. Amazing coach and leader. And so just before I pass the mic over to Janine, don't forget, at some point, take a selfie with your at-home, work from home, join the webinar situation. And if you've got your favorite food or beverage that you're enjoying at this time as well, please post that to our Facebook page. It's at Your Executive Coach on Facebook. I'm going to copy a link here and share that with you. And we've got Mary and Sue joining. Wonderful. And Debbie can't do a selfie. It's been weeks since you put on makeup. Love your sense of humor. And at the end of the event, after the Q&A, we have a special giveaway for everyone on the webinar today, and a special giveaway for one lucky participant. And you have to be here to be eligible, so be sure to stay until the raffle at the end. All right. Thank you for hopping in today, and for those wonderful responses, and for contributing to the chat. Please continue to type in your commentary. I've posted a link to the Facebook page. And now it's time to get started. So good afternoon, everyone. And again, my name is Tisha from YourExecutiveCoach.com. We are thrilled to host Clarity in Crisis, Navigating the Interim Normal. Dr. Janine Peak Emsick brings 30 years of experience on 5 continents, helping leaders thrive in the midst of change and crisis. And in addition to founding YourExecutiveCoach.com, 8 years ago, right on the heels of the Great Recession, Janine and her husband Mike co-founded the commercial design studio Emsick Architects. Janine holds a PhD in leadership from Trinity International University and continued her executive studies at the Harvard Law School program on negotiation. Janine teaches on change leadership in Creighton University's MBA program, as well as teaching the doctoral seminar, The Person of the Leader, for Tyndale's University Doctor of Ministry program. Janine's favorite Alexa command is, Alexa, play happy music from the 70s. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Janine Peak Emsick. Now is a great time to engage by using those reactions. You'll see those at the bottom of your screen. You can go ahead and click on that reaction and give Janine a round of applause. And I'll pass over now to Janine.
Well, greetings today. It's noon, so it's beginning the afternoon for me, but I know that we have folks joining us today from coast to coast, from within the United States. We've got some folks joining us from up in Canada. I just want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. You know, I'd like to start by asking a question. I'd like to ask, use 2 words, pick 2 words that capture how you're feeling right now, what you're bringing into this webinar right now, and enter those into the chat screen if you would. I'd like to see kind of what are we bringing that's similar or different as human beings into a webinar on clarity and crisis, navigating the interim normal. Unsure and opportunity, sad and hopeful, frustration and fear, curiosity, hope, opportunity, energy low, disconnected and hope, learning, in limbo, hopeful and curiosity, overwhelmed, stuck, challenged. Got several overwhelmed that are coming. Disconnected and isolated. That's from a friend, Sally, who lives in Paradise down in the Floridian Keys. And you can live in paradise and be disconnected and isolated. Anxiety. That's interesting. Matt never thought working from home could be so stressful. Matt, you used more than 2 words, but I'll give you permission. You know, when we're in the midst of change and crisis, we all bring very different feelings into the situation, into our experience. And you've done a great job being able to capture those words and that difference that we're feeling on a very broad spectrum. I'm going to flip screens right now. So give me just a minute. I'm still developing my my Zoom competence here. And let's get started on the content. There we go. So during this international COVID-19 crisis, executives are experiencing a profound tension between our jobs as leaders and our own personal realities. And I'm a small business owner. I own 2 small businesses. And since March 13th, just over a month ago, I have been required to cancel signature events. We made the decision to take our architecture design studio 100% virtual. I've been instructed by the 2 universities where I teach that any course that would normally be live, that I need to convert that into an online format, which creates complexity for me and for the students who are accustomed to coming into a place together and in a learning community. I actually had somebody say the other night, a student who's here in town, who is now taking online classes. She says, there's a reason that I go to live classes and I don't take online classes, because they don't work for me. So we're all having to adapt and to change. You know, for our small businesses, we've been running new financial reports that we've never run before that predict best and worst case outcomes, because we just don't know what this journey is going to look like as we move forward. So those are some personal changes that I've experienced. On a personal front, I'm actually supposed to be sitting on a beach in Florida right now, looking at 3 palm trees that I have over the years kind of begun to call my friends. We're supposed to be golfing out in the midst of the tropics, enjoying and sipping coffee and looking out over Boca Ciega Bay. I was supposed to visit my parents who are in their mid-80s, and my dad was having a heart procedure, and be able to be present to help with that. And none of that was possible because of COVID-19. In fact, we were going to buy my dad's little Fiat 500, one of those little tiny cars. I call it an American Girl doll shoe car. It's so tiny. And we were going to be driving it back from Florida to Omaha, Nebraska, and stop in Alabama at the key civil rights sites like the Selma Bridge and the Rosa Parks Museum. This has been a bucket list trip for me for many years, and we were finally going to cross that off this year. And it's actually the 2nd time that this trip has been canceled in the last several months. And so I've experienced significant personal disappointment as well, moving into the changes that we're all making due to the COVID-19 crisis. Like so many executives, I too have experienced this profound tension between what's expected of me as a leader, as a business owner, but while still setting the tone in the midst of all of this ambiguity, providing clarity in the midst of confusion, to create focus that fuels productivity, to help us meet the commitments that we've made to our clients. And at this same time, I'm personally navigating this complexity of personal disappointment, concern for my aging parents, and the complex feelings that come from not knowing what the next weeks, the next months might bring. After 30 years of coaching executives and their teams through transformational change and living as a small business owner, I've been through the dot-com bust, the Y2K technology crisis, 9/11 followed by Enron, and then the Great Recession. But probably the greatest crisis that I've experienced in my life was when my sweet little niece was diagnosed with rare advanced stage pediatric cancer at the age of 12. And given all of that, I have hope. I've learned from each of these crises. In fact, I can recite several ways that my life and work have improved on the back end of each of these crises. Now, that's not to say that I wish them on anyone, but I survived and I'm stronger for it. Michael Hyatt, one of my mentors, he likes to say, you have survived every crisis that you have ever experienced, because we all have experienced crisis before, and we all have tapped into resources to help us navigate through crisis. So this webinar, Clarity in Crisis, leading in what I'm calling the interim normal, is specifically designed to help us not just survive, but even more so, to help you thrive in the midst of COVID-19. And we have a special announcement at the end of the webinar. We have a couple of items, a bonus document that we'll make available, a crisis leadership diagnostic. And we're also excited to announce that we're launching a brand new course, Crisis and Clarity, Leading in the Interim Normal. And we have a special discount for those of you who are attending the webinar that we'll make available just before the question and answer. And we're going to be doing a drawing so that one of the attendees today will be able to attend that course at no charge. And so we'll be getting to that towards the end of the webinar. But let's get started. I want to talk first about something called the Stockdale paradox. It's the first thing that I thought of when I began to realize that the things that were happening around the globe were going to begin to affect my sphere of influence. Perhaps you've heard about it. If you've read Jim Collins' Good to Great, it's one of the really powerful stories that Jim Collins includes in that landmark book. And Admiral Jim Stockdale was the highest ranking military officer in the Hanoi Hilton. He was there about 7 years. He was tortured over 20 times. He was in isolation. And so by his own account, Stockdale came out of that prison camp even stronger than he was when he went in. And Jim Collins talks about when he went to go and interview Admiral Stockdale. And according to Collins, Stockdale responds to him, well, you have to understand, it was never depressing, because despite all of those circumstances, I never ever wavered in my absolute faith that I would not only prevail and get out of this, but I would also prevail by making this a defining event of my life that would make me even stronger and an even better person. And then Collins asked a great question. He said, well, so who didn't make it out as well as you did? And Stockdale answers, well, that is easy. I can tell you who didn't make it out. It was the blind optimists. They were the ones who always said, oh, we're going to get out by Christmas. And then Christmas would come and go, and another Christmas would come and go, and Easter would come and go. And Stockdale says they died of a broken heart. And then Collins writes, he says that Stockdale grabbed me by the shoulders. And he said, this is what I learned from those years in the prison camp, where all those constraints were so oppressive. He said there's these two seemingly opposing, competing ideas. He said, you must deal with the brutal facts of your current reality while maintaining absolute faith that you'll prevail and you'll be better on the other side. The brutal fact, we're not getting out of here by Christmas, but we will prevail. And that's our job as human beings in the COVID-19 crisis. Our job is to commit that we will get through this, we will prevail, and we will be better on the other side of this while we're facing the brutal reality. And we will lead with hope and with purpose for those we influence at work and at home. And these days, work and home for many of us are the exact same place. So today I'm going to introduce you to 3 keys to navigating the interim normal. The first one is understanding why the interim normal is not the new normal that everyone is talking about. And then I'm going to help you understand 3 or 4 key predictable human responses to crisis. What can we expect from human beings in the midst of crisis? And then we're going to take a look at something called situational awareness. And how does that inform how we can thrive as leaders in the COVID-19 crisis? So let's get started. Why the interim normal is not yet the new normal. You know, that weekend in March, when we were learning about some of the changes that might be coming, I kept hearing people in the media and our public officials saying, get ready for a new normal, get ready for a new normal. And I kept thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this is not a new normal at all. A new normal implies that we have arrived somewhere. We're in the middle of something and we don't understand what that is. And I drew a couple of little drawings, and I said, well, this is really what it would look like if it was a new normal. We've been in the status quo where we kind of had this comfortable place of peace and confidence, certainty and predictability. We had a sense of control over the decisions that we would be making from day to day, where we would eat, where we would sleep, where we would go out for dinner, where we could play golf, where we would congregate with our friends and with our family. Those were decisions that were natural and normal for us. And then disruption hit. And we very suddenly tanked in this sense of peace and confidence and certainty that we had. In fact, it was very uncertain, unpredictable, and there was a clear loss of control. We were being directed on many things that we were to make choices about, not make choices about. We were being asked to do. I suppose that is choice. And this was the new normal. And so if you notice in this model, there's this plateau on the bottom, that this is the new normal. And then at some point, everything would get better and we'd bounce back up, back to the way it used to be, to normal again. Well, I don't believe that it's helpful to think about right now as the new normal. In fact, if you Google new normal and you go to that profound free encyclopedia that's on the internet, new normal is a business term referring to the economic conditions following 2000 to 2012, the financial crisis that we now refer to as the Great Recession. And friends, I do not believe that we're on the other side yet of the COVID-19 crisis. We don't know what that's going to look like. And so the second drawing that I drew that weekend in March was about what does this interim normal look like? I feel like we're not in a new normal, we're actually in an interim normal between disruption and when we will arrive at a new and better place. And there are 3 factors actually that influence how we look at the interim normal in comparison to a traditional change model. We look at control, duration, and scope. So in a traditional change initiative or transformation initiative, when there's systemic change, usually there's a person or persons who are in charge that have this clear vision of how the future is going to be better, and they're casting that vision and inviting us to catch it and move forward. And there's a plan that's going to help us move towards that better future. And as far as duration, generally there's a target end date. There's a day that we're going to reach that goal and arrive, and there's milestones that have been established along the way that if we're a healthy organization, we will celebrate the milestones along the way to mark our progress. And then the scope is generally more local than it is global. In fact, even if you're part of a global organization or part of an organization that spans multiple states, the change is generally localized to your organization and to the key stakeholders that you intersect with as you conduct business. Well, the interim normal is very different. In the interim normal, there isn't a person that's in charge. The virus is in charge. And we are not going to have a sense of control until, I believe, a couple of things happen. Number one, we have to have a lot more tests that are available so that we can understand where the virus is manifesting itself and then be able to practice some containment around that. And then the second thing is when we have a vaccine. And once we have a vaccine, we actually are able to influence control over coronavirus, just as we did with smallpox and measles. But right now, the virus is in control. We do have some influence. The influence that we've had is the social distancing practices that we've engaged in. And the numbers are showing us that it's making a difference, that we have in fact bent the curve. We've flattened out that curve for a period of time. But we've just gotten to that stage in the last several days. We don't know the end date. As far as duration, we just don't know when we're going to arrive at our new normal. We have no idea. It could happen next week and suddenly we've got a vaccine and people are vaccinated in some miraculous way and we bump up to our new normal. It could take months. It could take over a year. I'm hearing that we won't have baseball until sometime, or at least baseball with crowds in California until sometime later in 2021. So we just don't know. And of course, we all know that this is global. I have spoken with folks that are aware of instances of coronavirus in tribal communities in the Amazon, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they don't have any ventilators and where they don't have tests, and so except in one city. And so this clearly is a global crisis. And so let's take a look at the model that I mapped out. And if the videos that you're looking at in your screen are in the way, you can move those around. You can actually make some choices. If you click through those, that would have the video the same size as the slides that I'm showing and center them. And so go ahead and noodle around. We're all learning how to use Zoom effectively right now, but go ahead and noodle around with that if you're not able to see the slides. And so this is what I drew. And normally I have the drawing with, oh, here it is. I've got it right here. This is what I drew on March 13th. And this is a version of it here on the screen. So it's the same plateau at the beginning, the status quo, and then suddenly disruption happens. We're told to live our lives differently. And there's a clear dip in the sense of peace that we have in our confidence and security, our sense there's far more uncertainty and unpredictability, and we have a loss of control over choices that we can normally make on a day-to-day basis. And then as we dip down to the interim normal, rather than it being a plateau and a flat line, I believe that we are going to continue to experience a series of ripples over a period of time. And things might get better for a period of time, and then they might change, and we might have to have higher restrictions once again. I am expecting that there are going to be changes for the better and for the worse in this period of time between today and when we reach the new normal. But if you look at this, the new normal, instead of it being the bottom of this process, the new normal is a better place at the other end. And we actually have some control over how we want that to be better on the other side. And so if you take a look, this period of time, there's kind of a goalpost there, a football goalpost, and between the disruption and this new normal, this is where there's an intersection between external forces that are out of our control and our own personal agency, where we have the ability to make choices. What we don't have control over is when we'll actually arrive at the new normal. And it seems like right now we're actually kind of right here where this green circle is, that we practiced for a period of several weeks now. We're into either our fourth or fifth week. Who would have thought that we wouldn't be able to know how long we have been practicing social distancing like this? So we were in a plateau, and then last weekend we started getting some good numbers. We actually saw that social distancing was working, and that in fact we were bending the curve. And for many, I kind of heard, oh, this is actually going to be the beginning of the end. We're going to be able to go back to normal. And there are some people who actually thought, let me see if I can pull this up, that we're done. We're going back up to the normal. That actually could happen, but I have no idea. And so if we take a look at two factors, the depth of how difficult it will be and the duration, these are two factors that we just don't have control over. It could be that we're going to move up very quickly. It could be that we wiggle up and then reach our new normal. It could be that we stay down here for a longer period of time than we know and then come up. We just don't know. And many years ago, I learned that the cause of anger and frustration is unmet expectations. When we have expectations about how something is supposed to go, my teenage son is supposed to take the garbage out. I'm supposed to get a raise. I'm supposed to get a promotion. Whatever that expectation is, when those expectations are not met, the result for most human beings is anger and frustration. And so if I have the mindset of that early model where we're in a new normal and things are going to stay the same, then as a leader, I'm expecting things to stay the same, and I'm not expecting the unexpected. I'm not preparing myself to need to adapt, to shift in the midst of this process. And I believe that our choosing to be prepared to adapt is an absolutely essential choice that each of us needs to make. For ourselves, for the people we work with, and now we actually have far more influence of what it feels like in our homes. As we and our spouses are often working from homes, we've got children we got college campuses now that are taking place in our living rooms, and nursery schools that are taking place at our feet. We have huddles every morning for our architecture team, and because nurseries are closed, daycare is closed, we have some team members with little babies who we can hear in the background in the midst of the meetings, and we're learning to have to adapt to what does that sound like, what does that feel like while we conduct excellent business. And so it's essential for us to plan for something that is going to look far more rockier or wavier, maybe with a little bit of rapids built into it as we move from where we are today to the new normal. A second thing to keep in mind that's just really important is that our mindset is crucial when we're navigating the interim normal. It's essential that we're focusing on what it is that we're filling our minds with. And I want to introduce you to a little girl named Serena. This is Serena and her parents. And once a month, after church, we'll have a few young couples over to our home for brunch. And it's just been a delightful thing we've done for the last, I don't know, probably a couple of years now. And we knew Serena when they were first announcing that her mom, Courtney, was pregnant. And so this is Serena, and we live in a house that was built in the 1880s, 1885. And this is our 1885-year-old stairway. And what does a toddler love when they learn how to walk? They love climbing the stairs. And I'll often spend time kind of taking care of the kids so that the couples can talk with one another, and they love playing on the stairs. So Serena is climbing up and down the stairs, and I start getting interested in what the conversation is at the table. And I'm paying attention there, and you know what happened. All of a sudden I hear thump, 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 boom, and a head smash on our 135-year-old wood floor. Serena is absolutely bawling and screaming with tears falling down her face, cheeks are red, and her mom picks her up and does the most interesting thing. Her mom and dad begin to say, "Come on, Serena, show me you're calm. Show me you're calm. Come on, Serena, show me you're calm." And in less than 60 seconds, this little toddler who had cracked her head on a very hard wood floor had found her calm. So I asked Courtney, the mom, "Where did you learn this? I sure wish my parents had taught me how to do this when I was a kid." And Courtney worked in in the local Nebraska hospital in a nutrition treatment center for kids that are coming off of feeding tubes or who have early on eating disorders. They tee them up to be able to return to school or start preschool. And when kids have to start eating when they don't want to eat, it is an uncomfortable experience for them, and they will often throw tantrums. And this is a behavior, this is a mindset followed by a behavior that all of the individuals that work in that nutrition center teach these children. I asked Courtney, when was it that Serena was able to actually make the transition and find her calm. And she said that it was at about a year old. If a 12-month-old who is pre-reason is able to work through a process of calming themselves down, certainly we as adults can do this. And one of the most frequent places I think we could demonstrate this is when our flights aren't working and we're traveling and there are delays. I often see children behaving much more responsibly than I see adults. And we can learn to find our calm. You see, when there is uncertainty and doubt, one of the things that happens, and here's little Serena playing at her head is just fine. Oh my gosh, as you can imagine, I felt absolutely horrible and incompetent, and Serena was fine, and I'm thankful for that. But when we're in the midst of uncertainty and unpredictability, human beings tend to fill that space with fear and limiting beliefs. We will believe that it will never work. We will believe that it is terrible. We will believe that we are frozen. Some of the mindsets that I have heard over the past month have been, we're going to go broke. We're going to lose all of our life savings. We're never going to be able to meet our deadlines if we go to a virtual team. How can we conduct business? Or this is a new one I've heard in the last week. I hate Zoom. I'm a Zoom zombie. So thank you for joining us today on this Zoom call, because we're all getting a little tired of these virtual meetings, aren't we? And then this I've heard a lot. I can't do this. If I have to work from home with my kids and or my spouse, I'm going to go crazy. How can I conduct meetings? How can I get things done? So these mindset, these beliefs are telling us why it will never work, why it's bad. And as much as humans have the ability to fill the void, the space of uncertainty, with limiting beliefs, we actually also have the power to convert limiting beliefs into what Michael Hyatt calls liberating truths, truths that help us see opportunity and hope in the midst of crisis. So the first one about losing our life savings. This is one of the things that I began to say to myself very early on in the midst of the crisis. There are hundreds of years of predictable economic cycles. Something significant has been anticipated for years. And in the long run, we're going to be just fine. It's going to feel rocky for a period of time, but in the long run, we are going to be fine. With regard to going virtual, we have a great team and we'll figure it out and it'll be great. And that phrase, we'll figure it out and it'll be great, is something that my husband and I have used with each other for probably a decade now. And it started when we were having some remodeling done in our 135-year-old home. And the carpenter cut a piece of 135-year-old wood too short. And you can't fix a piece of 135-year-old wood that has been cut too short. And my husband was livid, and it made sense. He loves his home. He loves the history. And I just remember looking him in the eye and saying, honey, we'll figure it out and it'll be great. And that's a phrase we use with one another whenever we encounter complexity. And when I'm frustrated and I'm angry about something, he'll look at me and say, honey, we'll figure it out and it'll be great. And that's a fantastic term that we have used that help us convert limiting beliefs into liberating truths. And then the last one, boy, we're on an adventure. We got 2 adults working at home and children working, have a college campus and a daycare all around us. This is an adventure. And this actually for me came from when I would drive my nieces and nephews around on Sunday afternoons when I lived in the Chicago area. And whenever I find myself lost in Chicago and the kids would wonder, where are we going? Where are we going? I'd say, oh, we're on an adventure. And all of a sudden they thought, this is a great thing that we're on. I'm with Aunt Nini and we're on an adventure. And somewhere around 15 or 16, one of them said, you know, Aunt Nini, I think that whenever we were on an adventure, you were lost, weren't you? So at some point, reason figures it out. But in fact, we can choose to say, this is different. We're going to figure out how to make it work. This is an adventure, and we're going to be better on the other side. Mindset is crucial. So you have a choice at this point. How do I want to be better on the other side? what are the things that I want to be different? And I created a list of a variety of things and areas where I want to grow on the other side. Everything from my physical fitness. And so I want to be playing my A game every day, and I want to continue to practice the things that I know are essential for me to do before I start work in the morning. And there are some folks who had their A game, their rhythm that they practiced every morning, and they do it on their way to work. And as soon as they weren't going to work anymore and work is going from their bedroom to their kitchen table, they've stopped exercising. They've stopped taking time for prayer and meditation in the morning or for reading. And we must maintain our personal best practices in the midst of this interim normal. We can choose how we're going to be better on the other side, how our teams can be stronger, and how our teams can be better on the other side. I like to ask this question. What does a thermometer do? What does a thermometer do? It reads the temperature. It says it's hot, it's hot, it's cold, it's cold, and it gives us a graphic of what that temperature is in the environment. What does a thermostat do? It does the same thing as a thermometer, but it takes the temperature and then it regulates the environment based on an ideal setting, a predetermined ideal setting that the thermostat regulates. And I like to ask people, are you living your life as a thermometer? It's hot, it's hot, it's cold, it's cold. Or are you choosing to regulate the environment around you for the better? Are you taking in what's hot and what's cold, what's good and what's bad, and saying, here is how I'm going to massage that, here is how I'm going to reframe that so that I am influencing my environment for the better? The reality is we're all thermostats. We all contribute to the shape and the feeling, the sensing, the effectiveness of the environment around us. But the question is, how much intentionality are you going to bring to the endeavor? The next section is about expecting the predictable human response to crisis. Guess what? There are predictable ways that we respond in the midst of crisis. Social scientists have been writing about this for generations. So one of the first, I'm going to share 3 of the 7 predictable dynamics that I cover in the course. The first one is that no matter how competent people are, expect that there should be a sense of confusion. I've been facilitating meetings for 35 years, and I'm good at it. I'm really good. This is like a no-brainer for me. And now all of a sudden I'm intersecting with technology and it feels different. And I often have found myself in the last few weeks feeling incompetent, not hitting the ball out of the ballpark. And so one of my favorite examples of competence is a guy named Jim Marshall. Jim Marshall was a defensive player with the Minnesota Vikings. He was one of their purple people eaters in the 1970s. And take a look at this trademark play that Jim Marshall made in one of their divisional playoffs. You should be able to hear the sound.
Myra straight back to pass, looking. Now stops, throws, completes it to Kilmer up at the 30-yard line. Kilmer driving for the first down, loses the football. It's picked up by Jim Marshall, who's running the wrong way. Marshall is running the wrong way, and he's running it into the end zone the wrong way. Thinks he scored a touchdown. He has scored a safety.
This is collective incompetence, in fact. So Marshall, in the midst of crisis, there's a ball in front of him. He picks it up. He says, what am I supposed to do if I pick up a fumble? I'm supposed to run to the end zone. And he starts running to the end zone. And if you noticed, his team members are standing there stunned. They don't know what to do. And Marshall gets there and he actually thinks that he has scored a touchdown for his team when in fact he has scored a safety for the other team. One of the things that fascinates me about this is that none of his teammates are trying to tackle him. They're all standing there stunned. They see their team member running for the wrong team, scoring for the wrong team, and they are paralyzed. This happens in the midst of change and crisis all the time. We will see our team members doing things that are destructive or unhelpful with good intentions, maybe not with such great intentions, and we don't do anything about it. We don't tackle them. We don't take the time to help them make a better decision. And that's because in the midst of crisis, expect the most competent people to be confused. And Jim Marshall is a Hall of Famer. Jim Marshall is a competent athlete, but in crisis, he was confused and he ran the wrong way. The second predictable dynamic of change is something I call the 10-80-10 rule. I actually learned this from Ben Sherwood. He's the former CEO of Disney, and he tells this story about how he actually came to Omaha, Nebraska for the FFA crash and crisis training. And in the midst of crisis, here's what you can expect. Of the population as a whole, within the first 60 seconds, 10% of the population is going to step up and take the lead. How do we make this work? What do people need? What kind of leadership can I provide? That's 10%. 80% are frozen in the middle, don't know what to do, waiting for somebody to provide them with some leadership and a plan. And 10% on the bottom are actually negative and will provide counterproductive behaviors that make it more difficult to have a successful outcome. You know, it's interesting in that Jim Marshall play we just watched. I think Jim Marshall is actually that top 10%. He was trying to make it work. He saw something and he ran. He thought he was scoring for his team. And the 80% were all of the team members that were frozen in the field, not knowing what to do. Think about when you first learned about COVID-19 and the changes that you were going to be asked to make. The equivalent of the first 60 seconds for you. For me, that was that weekend of March 13th. Where'd you go? Were you in that top 10%? Did you take the lead and say, how are we going to make it work? Were you paralyzed for a period of time? Or did you actually behave counterproductively? I have seen examples of all of this, of leaders that I've worked with for years. I've seen examples of all of these coming from the last 30 days. My hunch is many of us are on this call because we want to think about leadership. And my hunch is a majority of us are leaning towards that 10%. But given what we heard from the comments when we first started the meeting, my hunch is that there are also folks that are stuck in the middle right now, and some who might even not be behaving appropriately when they're having dinner with their family and shaping a negative environment with their kids. What can you do to step up and take the lead and move towards that top 10%? The final rule is about the human dynamics of the interim normal. And the rule is that it isn't the changes that do us in, it actually is the transitions. Changes external, changes the new rules that we're being asked to follow with how we live, how we work, all of that change is external to us, but transition is internal. Transition is the internal process that we go through to move from point A to point B. And unless this psychological transition occurs, we will stay stuck. So a guy named William Bridges, he wrote this little tiny book that I just love called Managing Transitions. Here's how he maps out this transition. And it's very much like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. So the transition process, there's an ending and a new beginning, right? So the ending for many of us was somewhere in that middle part of March, maybe sooner, depending on where we're located, maybe after that. And we still don't know where that new beginning is in the interim normal. And so if we take a look at this, the first stage is denial. I'm not going to have to do anything. I'm not going to change. I can go into work. I don't have to stay in my home. I'm going to have my family over for Easter. I can do what I want. That's denial. The first phase after denial is really interesting because it's actually betrayal, anger. How can you ask me to do this? Do you know how this is messing with my life? I can't get my work done this way. There's this emotional velocity that gets leaned in when we finally begin to engage in the change, and we don't like it. We don't want to be told what to do, and our life is not better. Believe it or not, that's progress because it's moving out of denial. So when I hear someone getting angry, I'm like, yes, we're making forward progress. The next stage, and in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's grieving model, and this follows her grieving model, is it's depression in her model. But in business, what I find is that it's expressed as identity crisis. I knew who I was and how I added value. I knew my career path. In the old way, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do in the new way. I don't know what my career is going to look like. I don't know about this technology. I don't even know if I want to think about that. And that's identity crisis, getting stuck down in the bottom without a sense of meaning and purpose. And then once we start taking ownership, we begin to bargain. I'll take this, I won't take that. I'll take these hours. I'm going to want to work in the morning early and then later in the day, and that'll work for me. We begin to take ownership of what is this going to look like for us. And that moves us towards the equivalent of acceptance, which is searching for solutions. And one of the things that we have learned is that you've got to just expedite this first part of the curve. You have got to be as fast as you can navigating denial and betrayal and navigating how you add value, so you have the momentum to come up to the other side. Because in the interim normal, if you are stuck in identity crisis, you're stuck here, guess what's coming next? Another change. And then you're going to be down here. And what's coming after that? Another change. And then you're going to be down here. And now all of a sudden, you're not going from here to acceptance. You're going from an even lower, deeper psychological state. And boy, that's a high hill to have to think about climbing. So navigate those early stages quickly. In fact, any stage before identity crisis is looking backwards. What it should be, how it used to be, and it isn't until you've navigated identity crisis and you begin moving up that you're moving forward. And if you are not, as a leader, looking forward, your team members they need for you to provide, where are we going and how are you treating me? And if you don't know where we're going and you haven't figured that out, your team members and your family are going to flounder. You need to provide that clarity for them. So I love this. When asked, would you rather work for change or just complain? 81% of the respondents replied, do I have to pick? This is hard. And it really is hard. And I believe you're either leaning into change to make it work or you're resisting. I don't believe there's this state of, I'm waiting to see, I'm not resisting, I'm just sitting on the fence, waiting to see how it comes. The extent to which we're not leaning in to make it work, we're not seeing change work around us. We're seeing resistance in the status quo. And so choose, are you going to lean in or are you going to resist? And that leads us to two choices that I have found myself making that have been helpful and that you might want to choose to make yourself. What are you going to bury and what are you going to build? I had to bury this vacation I'm supposed to be on right now. Every time I bring it up, I get frustrated. It is not helpful. What are the things you need to bury and move on? And what are you going to build? What are you going to build to make your future better? Because you have power to do that. You know, one of the things that I decided that I would build is an opportunity for folks to get exposed to the material that I have been teaching and coaching for a couple of decades online. And we have been working our tails off the last couple of weeks, putting together this webinar, putting together curriculum so that we could begin to operate in a new platform. We built a new future for our firm together. And you're participating in that today. What are you going to bury and what are you going to build? And so the third point is about situational awareness. And I'm going to touch on this very briefly, but I want you to think about two kinds of situational awareness: self-awareness and organizational awareness. Situational awareness is when we honestly and accurately assess the true current state of our organization and our sphere of influence within the organization. We face that brutal reality and we say, we're going to persevere. And so there's two kinds of situational awareness, self and organizational awareness. And there's actually two kinds of self-awareness, internal and external. Most of us think of self-awareness just being, I'm aware of my feelings and my thoughts inside of me. But actually, self-awareness includes that and the awareness that I understand how people experience me as a parent, as a friend, as a leader, as an executive. And that's external self-awareness. And Dr. Tasha Eurich out of Harvard mapped out kind of a matrix of self-awareness, internal and external. And there's 4 different places that you can land. You can be a seeker where you really don't have a sense of what you're feeling. If I ask what you're feeling right now, you might say, I don't know. So there just isn't the sense of knowing what you're feeling or knowing how others are experiencing you. And so that's low internal self-awareness. And then if I have high internal self-awareness without external awareness, these are people who tend to be far more introspective. And I find when I'm working with these individuals in the coaching context, They often have toilet paper on their shoes, things that they're not aware of, and it's flapping around as they're working and leading in the organization. And one of the things that we end up needing to do is figure out what's the toilet paper so that we can help you improve as a leader. So if we move to low internal self-awareness and high external self-awareness, these are the people who are always looking for how other people think about them, but they aren't grounded with their own internal sense of self and confidence and purpose. And so they're pleasers, trying to do what makes everybody else happy. And the ideal place to end up is to have both internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. I know who I am. I'm grounded. I can demonstrate personal agency, and I know how I'm experienced by others. I know my strengths. I know my deficits. I know how I need people to shore me up so I'm stronger, so we're stronger together. And that is what the research shows is actually a self-aware leader. And so the bonus that we're providing for you today is an assessment that you'll be able to use with your team. And so it's answering the questions that they need answered right now. Where are you taking me? How are you treating me? Do you care about me? How are you connecting with me? How are you connecting the team? And what resources do I need to help me do my job? And then an open-ended question, anything else. And the PDF that you'll be able to download actually has these in a questionnaire form where you can get ratings from your team members and actually have comments from them so that you can better understand what can you do to be more effective as a leader in the COVID-19 crisis. Because how we lead is completely different right now, as we are either fully virtual or some hybrid of virtual and working in place. So we'll get you that link just before the question and answer here in a few minutes. So as we close, I want to remind you that uncertainty requires courage. Erwin McManus, a futurist and a pastor, he says, leadership is not about organizing your life around your fears. Your freedom is on the other side of your fear. And I believe that courage doesn't actually exist without the presence of fear. We don't have to demonstrate courage unless we're feeling fear. And if you ask the neuroscientists about fear, what they'll tell us is that when the fear center of the brain is activated, the fight or flight, the anxiety, any exploratory activity, any risk-taking, any innovation, any creativity is turned off. So we really must choose to move out of fear into choice so that we're using the executive function of our brains. And what neutralizes the system? Taking action. When we take action in the midst of crisis, we move from a place of fear into a place of courage. In fact, I believe that the word encourage, we often think about that as being nice to people and saying nice things. I believe that to encourage is to enable courage in others, to use your courage to enable courage in others. And that's what we do as leaders. That's what we do as parents. That's what we do as aunts and uncles. And so how are you using your courage to encourage others? So in May 2008, this is my little niece, Allie, and this is us at Memorial Day in Saugatuck, Michigan, and we were watching parades and boat parades. It was just a spectacular weekend. And in January of 2016, January 11th, 2016, I received a 2-word text from my younger brother, and that 2-word text said, "It's cancer." My little niece, as I shared earlier, had been diagnosed with rare advanced stage pediatric cancer. She'd been 12 a month. She was really 11 plus a couple of weeks. I mean, it was the greatest crisis that I have experienced in my life. And so the first thing I thought is, what am I going to do? I got to find some quotes on courage. And I moved into this action mode and I'm researching it. And I found this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. You gain strength, courage, and confidence with every experience in which you really stop and you look fear in the face. If you're able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror, I can take the next thing that comes along. And she says, you must do the thing you think you cannot do. And then one of my favorite colors, not one of my favorite color is purple. You can see that behind me. And so I'm looking online, I'm like, how am I going to help Allie fight? I got to get some boxing gloves. And so I'm looking on Amazon to see what purple boxing gloves exist that I can have delivered to her the next day. And so here they are. And here's a picture of little Allie with her boxing gloves when she came home from school the next day. It was a long 6 months. This is actually a picture of her before chemo the weekend of Easter. We decorate a lamb cake every year. If you follow me at all, you're going to see a bunch of stuff about lamb cakes because it's that time of year, and we've been doing this for 13 years. But this is what Allie looked like Easter Sunday. This is what pediatric cancer looks like. The next day, we actually heard great news that the tumor had shrunk, and today Allie is 16 and is thriving in high school. This is how Allie chose to celebrate the end of her cancer treatment. I don't know if you can see the poster she wrote. She wrote these herself. It was tough, but I was tougher. It was tough, but I was tougher. COVID-19 is tough, but we're tougher. We're tougher on our own, but we're absolutely tougher together. So I encourage you, as you navigate this interim normal, that you navigate in a way that demonstrates choosing hope. Because as we choose hope, guess what? It's contagious. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for participating in this webinar. I'm going to hand over, Tisha, I want to hand over to you the microphone. I'm trying to unmute you and it's not working. If you can unmute yourself. And can you tell me who we've selected that will receive the complimentary registration to our Clarity in Crisis Leading in the Interim Normal?
I sure can. Thank you, Janine, for a fabulous webinar. And the prize that we have drawn is for Melissa Crawford. And Melissa Crawford, if she is on, go ahead and type in the chat that you are still here, and we'll be sure to get that free registration over to you.
I know Melissa. She's an executive around the corner and I can track her down. I know where to find her. So we're in good shape there. And then Tisha, I'd like for you to go ahead and post the link to the crisis leadership survey diagnostic that we've prepared so that they have that in the chat box. And then I'd also like for you to go ahead and post the coupon for the discount for the course, as well as where they can go to register. We'll be following up with that as well in an email. And so now we'd like to respond to any questions that you might have. And Tisha, I'm going to ask you to help coordinate that. Was there any question that was asked that you think would be good to start with?
Just looking through the chat here, and there was one really early on that it was a rough couple of weeks in advertising, some canceled contracts. I wonder if maybe you could
from Mary. Yeah. Yeah, Mary, it sounds like you're coming out of the lowest part for yourself. It sounds like you're beginning to make choices. Our roles are changing a lot, aren't they, right now? One of the first steps that I had to take was figuring out how I would continue to conduct business, what I would continue to do. And frankly, it's been fascinating. I've done this for years, but I have clients that are in the Netherlands and South Africa and Canada and London, and I've been having meetings with them over the years, and I never imagined that I'd have all of my meetings with my clients in this manner, but we're all figuring out new ways to take initiative. And I just want to remind you what we've learned from the brain scientists. The brain scientists tell us when we take positive action, we move out of fear. And when we choose a better future state that we want to arrive at, we will begin to take action towards that. And so I'd like to think about what I call, there's two words I use. I'll use one that's called a cornerstone shift. And a cornerstone shift, if you think about a long building and you shift the cornerstone of that building just a tiny little bit, even just a millimeter, all of a sudden as you look out at the length of that wall, suddenly the trajectory has changed dramatically because of a tiny millimeter cornerstone shift at the beginning. So I like to think in terms of cornerstone shifts as well as critical inches. So if your goal is to move in this direction, and again, we don't know where we're going to end up or when we're going to end up there, but we can set some goals in that direction. What is the next critical inch that I need to take? What is one thing that I can do differently that will lead me to a better future? Sometimes it's personal choices about our A game. Sometimes it's about how we do our work or how we communicate with others. What is one small thing that you can do? Sometimes we think, oh, I've got to do a bunch of big things. We create this big map. And actually we confuse planning with action. And I really encourage you, find a small cornerstone shift or a critical inch that you can take here in the next 48 hours, because you will not only have a sense of progress, you'll feel a whole lot more in control. That will begin to lift some of the uncertainty that is surrounding your world. We've got some more questions down here. Do you see another one, Tisha?
I do. One's from Debbie Taylor. Do you think there is value in slowing down to evaluate the environment before making decisions or initiating changes?
I'm going to say, Debbie, yes and no. This is an amazing opportunity for us to slow down. My quiet times in the morning, and I have a regular discipline. I get up, I exercise for 30 minutes. I do an elliptical intervals for 10 minutes, and then we do we have an app that is the 7-minute workout. So it's 12 exercises that you do for 7 minutes, and it just requires your body weight in a chair. And then I stretch because I keep getting injured, and I found that stretching is as important as the other two. So I do that. Then I shower, and while my hair is drying, I do my quiet time, and I start by reading literature that's important to me. So I read scripture every morning. I read the Bible, and then I practice something called contemplative prayer, which is a monastic version of meditation. On the days that I don't do that, my trajectory is off. It is interesting that after a few years of working towards this, like my contemplative prayer, I started with trying to do it for 2 minutes. It was so hard. I have an app that times it for me, and I'm actually up to 20 minutes. And I just feel grounded in peace. And because I'm pausing to reflect now, I'm getting the most amazing ideas, and I'm finding ways to help other people. It's really been quite rewarding. It feels good to have this quietness that is resulting in possibilities. And so it is really wise to use this time. I know individuals who have chosen, here are the books that I'm going to read because I'm not going out in the evening. Here are the walks that I'm taking. And around here we have to wear a mask when we're going out and walking. And so so those are times that any of the scientists will tell us free our brains up for possibilities, that new thoughts come in when we release the focus on what I've got to get done. So I really encourage using this time as a season of contemplation and assessing what you'd like to do. But at the same time, don't confuse productive reflection with paralysis. And so many of us, and I've spoken with some individuals who are spending their nights watching the news from 7 o'clock to midnight. And if it's cable, you've got some repetitions in there. And that is not a productive use of the opportunity for quiet and stillness. So if you're using that reflective time productively, if you're engaging it as a human being who is on a journey to something better, and that's reflection, absolutely. But it is also wise to take action and to identify what are the steps that you can do, particularly if you're a leader. If you're a leader, we don't have time to sit still right now. There are things that we need to do because we need to be prepared to expect the unexpected and adapt. I hope, does that answer your question, Debbie? Yes, productive reflection is very different than paralysis. Yep, good. Thanks for your thoughts. Good, good. Tisha, is there another question in there? We've got maybe another minute before we need to wrap up.
Those are all the ones that I see right now, unless somebody is still typing. And I think we answered all of the ones that did come through in the chat.
Well, then I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your time, for your attention. I thank you for your positive encouragement in the chat box. And we're going to be offering regular webinars around topics that are important to us. I believe the one we're doing in May, we've got somebody who is a brain scientist, and we're still haven't identify who the second person will be, an executive, talking about clarity in crisis, gratitude. What does gratitude look like in the midst of the crisis? And what does gratitude actually do to your brain and how you live your life? And so you can expect from me now, this has created an opportunity to have intersections with people all around the world about best practices that can help us be the best human beings that we have been designed to be, the best that we have been created to be. And so thank you for your time. And we're going to go ahead and end the webinar right now. Have a fantastic day. Choose hope. It's courageous. No, it is courageous, but it's contagious. Thank you.